Hey folks, Roland Martin. Welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered, live from Los Angeles. Folks, it is an absolutely busy day in politics. We'll break down voter suppression happening in Georgia, where the man who keeps the voting rolls is running against Stacey Abrams, yet he is doing some things that are going to impact whether or not a number of African Americans, thousands, will be able to vote in November. We'll tell you exactly what is going on. We'll also go to Florida, where we'll focus on the hurricane now being downgraded, but also what's happening in politics, where Andrew Gillum is being attacked by Republican Ron DeSantis, still running ads in the middle of a hurricane. The hell is he doing? Plus, DeSantis, we now know he authored a book where he pretty much said slavery really wasn't that big of a deal. Last night, Donald Trump lied his ass off again at a rally about black people loving him and how he's done so much for African Americans. Then he writes this opinion piece in USA Today that is an absolute joke. Lies, 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 lies. We'll break it down with Trump Lives Matter. Also, Attorney General Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, he's back at it again, telling to Chicago cops, hey, let's get rid of that consent decree. We'll talk to activists in Chicago about that as well. Plus, if the Democrats catch that blue wave, some black members of Congress will be chairs of major committees. We'll tell you exactly what is going to take place when it comes to that. Folks, it's time to bring the funk. I'm Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Folks, the blue wave comes in November. Democrats all across the country will be winning lots of races, potentially taking over the United States House, potentially the United States Senate, and cleaning up even when it comes to gubernatorial elections. One of the big reasons for that, African Americans, especially black women, turning out in huge numbers. People are registering left and right, but what's happening is Republicans are continuing massive voter suppression efforts in Georgia, where Stacey Abrams is running for governor on the Democratic side. She is facing against Brian Kemp, who is the Georgia Secretary of State, who wants to be the next governor. Yet as Secretary of State, he is the one who is over the elections there as well. Atlanta TV station WSB is reporting that requests from African American voters for absentee ballots in Georgia are coming in at a rate not seen since President Barack Obama was elected in 2008. But Kemp is trying to deny folks. What he's actually doing is he's holding them up and somehow challenging them. This is what the Associated Press reported about Kemp's exact match rules, meaning that just missing a middle initial can put your registration on hold. Quote, an analysis of the records obtained by the Associated Press reveals racial disparity in the process. Georgia's population is approximately 32% African American, according to the U.S. Census, but the list of voter registrations on hold with Kemp's office is nearly 70% black. Not only that, people are not being notified if there is a problem, so you have to check to see if you are registered. Folks, what in the hell is going on there in Georgia? These are some of the things that Republicans are doing all across the country. In fact, in Missouri, a federal judge slapped down the Secretary of State in Missouri who put out some misleading ads literally saying that voters in Missouri needed their voter ID to vote. That is not the case. In the Supreme Court, they've also upheld a voter ID bill in North Dakota that many say will actually hurt Native Americans. Why? Because in North Dakota, they require you to have a physical address and not use a P.O. box. Well, those Native Americans who live on reservations, they don't have those addresses, they're using P.O. boxes. So several thousand Native Americans may not be able to vote in November as a result of the Supreme Court holding up this particular issue. And so we're seeing this. Why does that matter? Because you've got a critical U.S. Senate race that's happening there as well. Folks, what we are seeing again are Republicans across the country continuing to try to shave off the number of votes, denying people the opportunity to vote. I want to go to my panel right now. Joseph Williams, senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. Barbara Arnwine, founder and president of the Transformative Justice League. Dr. Cleo Monago, a socio-political analyst and activist. Joseph, I want to go to you first. Again, we're seeing what Republicans have done since Obama was elected in 2008. We saw it in North Carolina, in Mississippi, in Texas, in Florida, in Alabama. Now we're seeing it in Georgia. We're seeing it in Missouri. We're seeing it in North Dakota. They want to deny people the opportunity to vote.
Well, it's not a surprise, actually. You talk about how it went back to President Obama. It goes back even further than that. Carol Anderson, an academic at Emory University, wrote a book about it where she talks about how this voter suppression campaign stretches all the way back to the 1890s in Reconstruction. In Mississippi in particular is where the genesis of it has happened. And it has taken place constantly from then until now. You had poll taxes then. Now you have voter ID laws. You had count the number of bowls on a bar of soap then. Now you have to get a driver's license, a birth certificate, or a passport to even think about registering, and they're not going to tell you, they're not going to help you. So this is part of a continuum. It reached an apex under Obama with the Shelby County decision, and now these are just additional measures to try to push it even further because we all know every vote counts.
And Barbara, because what we're seeing, to Joseph's point, because the Supreme Court made that particular ruling, when it came to Shelby v. Holder, those states are no longer required to do preclearance. So they can do anything they want when it comes to changing their voting procedures, and they don't have to worry about the Department of Justice weighing in.
Because you have Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, and everybody be very clear, that whole act that you saw, happening with Lindsey Graham in South Carolina is because he is on deck to become the next Attorney General after the midterm elections. So we got to be very clear that when it comes to the Department of Justice, there is no justice to be found for African Americans seeking equality at the voting place, seeking no non-discriminatory voting rights. So what I want everyone to remember, is that it's not just the Supreme Court. In 2011, I unveiled the map of shame that showed all the states, over 40 states at that point, that were entertaining some kind of form of voter suppression measure. It's because in 2010, 25 million people who voted in 2008 did not vote midterm. That's why people need to know that the midterm elections are critical, Roland.
Cleo, again, we have seen the games Republicans have played for a long time. And again, what they desperately need is to shrink the electorate, shave off several thousand votes because they are afraid that America is becoming more black and brown.
Well, what concerns me is that, as you just said, they were doing it a long time. And my question keeps being, why don't we anticipate this and do what we can to block the likes of Kemp in terms of his activity much before the election, knowing how the Republicans can operate? Stacey is doing really well in Georgia. I mean, everywhere you drive around, her signs are up, and they're really, really nervous because they usually control it on the state level. So we should expect this. George Bush did this in Ohio, in the Midwest. This is not a surprise. What are we going to do going forward and immediately to prevent this, to anticipate knowing what they always do?
Well, here's what needs to happen is what State Representative Alicia Reese is trying to do in Ohio. Change the state constitution to have a voter bill of rights as opposed to every 2 or 4 years trying to go to the courts to change these things. We're seeing the ballot initiative in Florida. That's about polling at about 72% to give formerly incarcerated folks the right to vote. She has been desperate to get Democrats, to get progressives, to get these billionaires to fund this initiative because it's already been certified. If they can get the 330,000 signatures needed to put on the petitions, get it certified, they can put it on the ballot. unless we begin to say, fine, the Supreme Court not going to do their part. If you change the state constitutions, Barbara, and I know that's expensive, I know it's difficult, but if you change the state constitutions and you put in the state constitutions the affirmative right to vote, which does not exist in the U.S. Constitution, then we're not dealing with these same games being played by Republicans.
And absolutely. And that fight is not only, in Ohio and other states, but Michigan. They have Promote the Vote, where they are pushing, for their state constitution and for their legislative requirements, greater access to the ballot box. These are, our efforts. When you were talking about and you mentioned the absentee voting flood that is happening in Georgia, that is activists on the ground. I've been working with them who are doing that work. They're having what they call pews to the polls. So they're at churches where people are filling out their absentee ballots and they're helping people to make sure they do them right and get them in the mail. So we know that our fight right now is against, all of this voter suppression, but it's for better, voting rights, including automatic voter registration. If you have AVR, as 13 states do, mostly white states, predominantly white states, but if you had automatic voter registration, 90% of your problems go away. So that's, one of the big things. Same-day voter registration is absolutely key. Online voter registration, right now, just think about it. Yesterday, 15 states closed out their voter registration. And of that 15, 4 people had almost zero options on the last day because all they could do is try to download a form and put it in the mail. It had to be postmarked that day. But people who had online voter registration could register all the way up until 11:59 p.m. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about really changing the dynamic where people don't see this as just an electoral battle, that we create permanent infrastructure where our whole battle is 24/7, 365 days a week, where our children don't only go to church and just attend, something called Bible study, but they do freedom school study. So they know what it means to vote and why the vote is so important to our freedom.
But what, if anything, on a policy level can, like the Congressional Black Caucus, do in terms of a policy to minimize these interruptions of a democratic process?
They can't, because the problem here is that by the Supreme Court and Shelby B. Holder pretty much gutting this Voting Rights Act, you no longer have the pre-clearance requirements. The Congressional Black Caucus can't do anything because you have a Republican, Sensenbrenner, who is from Wisconsin. Even though he has a bill many CBC members don't like, he at least is saying, the Supreme Court said Congress needs to fix the formula because it's outdated. Sensenbrenner, Republican, put forth a bill. He had about 10 or 12 co-sponsors 2 Congresses ago. This current Congress, he's got 3 or 4. So Republicans are like, we don't want this. They have no effort. You have Bob Goodlatte of Virginia, who chairs a House Judiciary Committee, does not want to call any hearings. You don't see the Senate Judiciary calling any hearings. Republicans don't want to change the Voting Rights Act. They don't want to improve it. And so since that's the case, we cannot depend on the Supreme Court. We can't depend on Republicans in Congress. The only way to go about this, we're going to have to go state by state. And frankly, we don't have to even target all 50 states. What you do is you target the states with the highest concentration of black voters, and you put it in the Constitution. And Joseph, real simple, white folks aren't going to vote against guaranteeing the right to vote in the Constitution, because these voter suppression efforts are impacting elderly white people, like in Wisconsin, young white voters, like in Wisconsin and North Carolina as well.
And women, they are lumped in oftentimes with people who have struggled to maintain access to the vote. What you're saying, Roland, is 100% correct. You can't depend on Congress at this moment. Until things flip, nothing's going to change. The second thing is you have a very real threat in Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who, with Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, both worked together in justice departments to repress the vote under Nixon and under Bush and under Reagan to a degree. So what you also have now are volunteer squads that are going state to state to register people who help them get the documents that they need. help them get the kind of access to the polls that you're talking about. The problem here also, it's a great setup, but the problem here is money. And that's one of the things that Republicans are depending on, is the fact that this has to be a volunteer effort. This has to be an effort outside of government, and it's going to cost a lot of money.
One of the reasons why...
Again, let me explain to everybody who's watching, because you might be saying, oh, it's all emotional. No. A federal panel found that in North Carolina, Republicans in North Carolina had a laser-like focus on black voters. They were specifically asked in emails, when are African Americans voting in early voting? 70% of African Americans in North Carolina voted the first week of early voting. So what did they do? Got rid of all of the early voting locations during the first couple of weeks, and they only had one location open in each county. Guess who copied that? Ohio. Other states saw it. So what Republicans are doing, Barbara, and I got about 45 seconds before I go to the next topic. What Republicans are doing is that they are finding, they're threading that needle. They're finding the legal ways to shave off 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20, 30, 40,000. And then all of a sudden you look up, we know from the studies, upwards of 200,000 people in Wisconsin were impacted by their voter ID. And in the last election, a federal judge called in Governor Scott Walker, even though the Obama Department of Justice okayed their voter ID and said, why are you dragging your feet issuing voter IDs? So even though they got the law approved by DOJ, they still were dragging their feet in delivering the IDs because they did not want those folks to vote. Barbara, final comment before I go to the next topic.
Yes, and the most important thing for us to know is that you can only win, as Reverend Jesse Jackson says, if you fight. And the reality is that we have been overcoming and beating them at this game when we organize, when we fight, when we turn out, when our churches do what they need to do, when our civic groups need what they need to do, when everybody who's listening does and watching does what you need to do. This is our fight. This is our moment. This is our time. We got to seize the moment.
All right, folks, let's move over to Florida, where there's a major hurricane that's already had landfall hitting the Florida Panhandle, the worst it has been hit since the 1800s. Winds gusting 110 miles an hour, and of course, tides about 13 feet than normal. You also have, of course, what is happening there, a political storm in Florida, where you have huge campaigns taking there. First, the right to restore the voting rights of those who formerly incarcerated. A Senate race pitting Governor Rick Scott, against, of course, longtime Senator Bill Nelson. Then you have, of course, the race to replace Scott as governor. Ron DeSantis, former member of the U.S. Congress, as well as Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum. Now, Gillum suspended campaigning to focus on the hurricane, but the Florida GOP thought it was still a good idea to run this ad.
After the hurricane, we had no electricity for over a week. Utility companies lined up trucks to restore power. But as mayor, Andrew Gillum refused help from workers. The trucks just sat while people suffered. Incompetence or extreme politics? I don't know. But leaders are supposed to help people in tough times. And Andrew Gillum, he didn't help us. He failed us.
First of all, Joseph, I want to go to you first. How despicable. Normally, when you have a major event like a hurricane, political campaigns actually suspend their commercials. For the Florida GOP to run that ad when a hurricane is on its way is shameful. They have been getting criticized, folks all over Florida, saying, how dare you even do such a thing. I even saw a tweet from Elise Jordan, who is a Republican contributor to MSNBC, who also criticized that. These are the games that Florida Republicans are playing. You're attacking a guy about a hurricane when a hurricane is hitting the state as we speak. That's not leadership.
No, it's not leadership, but it also is indicative of what we've become or what we've reached in terms of the Republican Party. Again, part of a continuum. Stuff that used to be despicable and abnormal isn't anymore. Stuff that used to be behind the scenes is now out in the open. So it doesn't surprise me that they would run this ad. It also doesn't surprise me that people would criticize them. But what also, the third thing that doesn't surprise me is the fact that they probably really don't care. At this point, it's about holding on to power. At this point, any means necessary, anything we have to do to hold on to the power. And that, again, stretches back to the whole voting rights issue that we were talking about, excuse me, about the fact that you're willing to cheat to win because you know the numbers are not on your side, the trends aren't on your side, and history is not going to be on your side. So the ad itself is not mind-boggling to me. What is mind-boggling is the fact that we're even talking about them having done such a thing.
All right, the Super Black, I know you're going to appreciate this here. Ron DeSantis, of course, began his campaign using the phrase monkeying around, with referring to his black opponent, Mayor Andrew Gillum. But now Gillum has something else. It turns out that Ron DeSantis, in 2011, wrote a book called Dreams from Our Founding Fathers, where he attacked President Barack Obama. And this is what DeSantis wrote about slavery. Quote, some of the notorious compromises that demonstrated a toleration of slavery, such as the federal ratio, which allowed the slave-holding states to count 5 slaves as the equivalent of 3 free citizens, were even thought to be necessary to ensure ratification. And check this out. Counting slaves as less than a full person for purposes of representation benefited anti-slavery states. Now, Cleo, Ron was also saying that, well, you know, even though they ratified slavery, they also put the provisions in the Constitution which allowed us 75 years later to fight against that and actually have the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, ooh, thank you, boss DeSantis. We sure appreciate all the good work y'all did to allow us to be able to fight for our freedom some 75 years later. Thank you, boss.
Pretty much. I mean, I've told you and I'll tell you again that these people are desperate. I think they're sociopathic and crazy and really want to stay in power no matter what. Like the brother just said, they're desperate and they really are doing anything to stay in power. So, I mean, what else can be said? This is not surprising at all that this guy had this perspective, at least as out there. Many of them don't have a published book that actually puts their perspectives on Front Street. Many of them feel this way, but I don't really believe they're thinking or saying about black people in terms of inferiority is how they really feel. It's just a smokescreen so they can keep the myth of their superiority in place and for the rest of us to fall forward. But none of this is surprising, not at all.
And Barbara, again, this is the guy who wants to be the governor for all citizens in the state of Florida.
Yes, and we know that this whole fight to preserve and to promote, you know, white supremacist patriarchy in the United States is, you know, this is what this fight about, you know, with some layering of autocrats, you know, for an autocratic, you know, state on top of it. But what we got to understand is that, you know, these folks are going to lie, they're going to dissemble, they're going to use anybody they can to hide behind and do everything they can to hold on to this power. You know, Senator Grassley, that was there presiding over the whole Kavanaugh hearing. And let's be very clear, he's the same man that's blocking any hearing on the Voting Rights Act amendments in the Senate. So these are the same people, you know, misogyny, patriarchy, white supremacy, all go together. People get this stuff confused. They think you got white women over here, black people over there. This whole thing has been there since the beginning of this country. It was founded as a white supremacist patriarchal order. And that has not changed. When you look at the United States, think about this, Roland. The United States is 104th out of 190 countries in women representation in government. 104th. We failed 9 slots in the last 6 years, from 95th to 104th. We're going backwards. So it's very important for us to understand what we're up against, because if we don't see the totality of the challenge, then we don't get it right.
But
all right, folks, last night there was a rally, and Donald Trump lined his ass off again in his rally, the latest rally. Of course, so Trump held a rally in Iowa where he tried to take sole credit for improving the lives of black people when it comes to unemployment and poverty rates. And he said, oh, just everything about black people is just glorious now that I'm president.
African-American unemployment has reached its lowest rate ever recorded in the history of our country. And African-American poverty has reached its lowest rate ever recorded. And Kanye West, who gets it, and Big Jim Brown, how do you think he'd do in the NFL today? Bum, the greatest. But they're coming over to the White House very shortly. We're going to have a little lunch and talk about it, but they get it. How do you win when you hear those numbers? Because the Democrats for 100 years have been promising African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asians. They've been promising everything. Nothing happens. Here we are, less than 2 years, the best employment numbers, the best numbers they've ever had in virtually every category,
Okay, y'all. If you want to see what a lying white man looks like, that's Donald Trump. Okay, first and foremost, he said every category, black folks are doing better. Y'all, black home ownership rate hit a high of about 60.9% in the 2000s. It is below 45. That, to me, don't sound like we're just doing so great. 70 years ago, there were 1.9 million black-owned businesses in America. 1.8 million black-owned businesses had one employee. Today, there are 2.6 million black-owned businesses. 2.5 million have one employee. When we had 1.9 million black-owned businesses, they were doing an average of $110,000 in revenue a year. Today, with an additional 700,000 black-owned businesses, they're doing an average revenue of $54,000. I'm sorry, please, Joseph, tell me how things are just going so great. And I really got to have you, Barbara, and Cleo address this here. If Trump is just so amazing for black people, why won't he come talk to the NAACP and come talk to the Urban League or go talk to Rainbow Push or National Action Network or the National Association of Black Journalists? Why won't he sit down with members of Black Press? See, I figure if it's all gravy, oh man, you should be willing to talk to people. But no, you go to one of the whitest states in America and tout how great black folks are doing.
Well, it's I don't even know where to start. I mean, honestly, he won't go to any of those organizations because he knows this stuff is not true. Right. And there are two words that keep him from doing that: reality check. All right, number one. Number two, these are statistics, made up statistics for white people. They're not for black people, because black people would say, listen, what are you talking about? This is nowhere true. Go down to Decatur, Alabama. Go down to Jackson, Mississippi. Go even to the South Bronx. Go anywhere, and you will find that we still have very real, very serious challenges as far as black unemployment is concerned. And even if you put those numbers in context, even if you assume that he's telling the truth, black unemployment has historically been double that of whites. So even if he is telling the truth, and we have a 3 percentage point unemployment rate among America broadly, that still represents a 6% unemployment rate in African Americans. So that's roughly, one out of every, I get the math wrong, but anyway, the point is there are still problems in the fact that we still have an unemployment rate that's double that of whites. He's making this stuff up. It's not true. He doesn't want to come clean on it, and it's not for our consumption anyway.
But why should he come clean? What he's done has worked. One thing you can't deny about Donald Trump is that he's been consistent. He's doing the same thing he did before he became president, and before I, among others, predicted he would become president. Why should he do anything different? It works. And also, there's something that we may or may not be realizing here. On the way over here, I was in an Uber, and I was talking to a young lady, a black woman, about politics, and she talked about how she appreciated how passionate and real Donald Trump was, as opposed to how stoic other presidents have been. She appreciates his emotionality, his realness, and not that I think that's sane or something that people should actually follow. The bottom line is that the optics, the passion, the quote-unquote realness that he says, because people don't do any research. And when he was running for president, CNN and other places would line up some of his lies. The man became president of the United States anyway. So it works.
But Leo, you nailed it. And I've heard the people say, yeah, I know he lying, but he speaks his mind.
But that, Roland, that's
It's like,
because...
wait a minute, hold on, it's like, have y'all lost y'all damn mind? It's like, I know he full of it and he just making stuff up, but he gonna tell you what's on his mind. Like I keep saying, dude, I'm in Los Angeles right now. I can walk out this building and I can run into a babbling idiot on the street who gonna be hollering, yelling, cussing, anybody walk by. He's speaking his mind. I don't want his ass to be the president.
But Roland, you got to remember that the whole basis of this country was built on lies.
Thank you.
You know, the narrative, the popular narratives about the United States are all lies.
Yes.
You know, they don't talk about the, genocide and the slaying and the massacres and the brutality and, the fact that police only exist in this country and patrol because of slavery. I mean, there's so much they don't want to talk about. So what he does is he makes their souls feel good because he gives them lies that makes people comfortable about being racist so that people can go up to, Latinos and holler at them if they're speaking Spanish, who can call the police on a black man because he's babysitting 2 white kids and he's driving them in a car. I mean, these are the kinds of things that he gives credence to. He makes it palatable. He makes it acceptable. And that's where the danger is, because he's speaking in all this coded language. He's playing on all this racial memory. He's coming up with ways of making white people not understand and not feel like they got to fight against racism. And so we have to bring that battle. We have to bring the truth.
But the person that I was
Go ahead, Cleo.
The person that I was talking to, and the majority of people that I talk to are black.
Yeah, but she said
and I'm not really talking about him feeding the fire to white folks. I'm talking about black people who said that he's so real.
Yeah, but look at the approval ratings from blacks. It's not that good.
Look, we just got to go ahead and say it. It's some ignorant black folk,
Right.
And look, like Trump talking about, Kanye coming to the White House, and I know everybody's talking about the CNN segment last night where Bakari sells and Terra said, see, here's the deal. I'm not gonna sit here and call Kanye crazy. I'm not gonna say he's got a mental disorder, because he does. But here's the piece. I'm gonna deal with reality, and I'm gonna say, I don't care if Jim Brown is going to the White House for lunch. I don't care if Kanye is going to the White House for lunch. Guess what? Roland Sebastian Martin went to the White House for lunch when Trump had bought it by the TV anchors. And you know what I did? I didn't go there wearing no damn red Make America Great Again hat. I walked in there with my notepad and with some questions saying, what you gonna do about the issue of Chicago and violence? What about the issue of your Department of Justice when it comes to the consent decrees? What about housing? See, Trump don't want to answer those questions. And see, so I don't mind black folks going to the White House. What I mind is whether you're gonna sit there and look like a bump on a log and actually challenge him, saying, okay, fine, you want to sit here and talk about what you do for black people? Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. That's why I disagree. The Congressional Black Caucus last year declined the second meeting with Trump. I think they need to go back, Joseph. I believe that Congressman Cedric Richmond need to walk in there, and then when the camera's in there, and Trump's sitting there smiling, and he looking for a photo op, then when Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, okay, time for y'all to leave, Cedric Richmond should say, we want the cameras to stay. We want the American people to actually see this meeting. And if the cameras don't stay, we gonna leave. And then, now Trump gonna be stuck. Now what if the cameras stay? Because he loves having the cameras, Joseph, when it comes to his cabinet meetings. So what then happens if they say, no, let the cameras stay? And then the cameras are recording, jamming him up on the issues, jamming him up on why he wants to cut out the minority supply development offices, jamming him up on consent decrees, jamming him up on voter suppression. See, that's why we should meet with them. See, don't fall for the okie doke with Jim Brown and Kanye West. No, say, why won't you meet with civil rights organizations? Have the cameras stay and then see how he responds, Joseph.
Well, he definitely will respond, and he definitely likes the attention. The response is probably not what he would want to do, and he probably would deliver some kind of a platitude that would disappear in the ether as soon as the camera stopped. So we know that he does like attention. We know that he can be pressed on the issues. If he's not prepared, that's the sweet spot where you get some real traction on some of the issues. Now, he never
and I'm
will.
gonna tell you what you don't get. I don't know about that. I'm unfamiliar with that. And then they'll be looking around like, oh, that wasn't on the agenda. No, see.
But he doesn't like to look bad. So if that doesn't.
My point is, if you're the Black Caucus, don't send a letter saying we're not going to meet. Say, no. We welcome a meeting.
Well,
we love
but
to
Roland,
meet.
part of the problem is that people got to remember what we're talking about, this leadership, the lack of thereof.
Mm-hmm.
That this man, you can meet with him all you want to. He can make all the promises he wants to. He can have all his cabinet there and make the promises. And then you walk away and he flips his mind the next day. You know, we got to talk about the fact that this is not a true leader.
Barbara, we know that. But the point I'm making is this here. If the cameras are there, this is not a rally. This is not a news conference. This is not him sitting at his desk. This is him having to answer the questions right there, and they say, no. I need you to answer the question. I need to know, Mr. President, since you say black-owned businesses, since you say it's all about black folks and doing great, does your budget call for the elimination of the only federal agency that is there to help minorities launch businesses? Yes or no? Cameras on. To deal with truth. See, that's why Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk are Talking Points USA. Candace running around here, she challenging Bakari Sellers to debate, and Don Lemon, she challenging over here to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They challenging the boy who plays Superman or Captain Kirk or one of them doggone characters. They challenging everybody. But for 3 months, I've been waiting to get in that ass.
Roland.
For 3 months.
Roland, we keep telling him. He won't listen to us. We keep telling him they're not going to debate you.
Roland,
Hold on. I'm going to get October 3rd. I sent Charlie Kirk a direct message, a DM on Twitter. He ain't said nothing in 8 days. Because, see, they don't want that heat. And, see, my deal is the way you deal with Trump and the way you deal with the Trumpettes in the Trumpites is you challenge them and say, y'all want some of this? Come on. But, see, they want us not to show up. That's what they want.
I don't think they're going to show up if you challenge them like that, Roland. They know they're going to get fronted.
No, hold up. I got one better, Cleo. Candace Owens and Talking Point USA are having a conference for young black conservatives October 25th through October 28th. Guess what? I'm showing up.
Okay.
I'm going to walk in there in all black.
In all black?
With my camera, just like you looking right now. I might walk in there looking like Wakanda. We're going to have the cameras with me. And matter of fact, I'm going to see if they try to throw us out. Since y'all, we going to say, we a black show. We covering black people. We would love to cover your conference. See, I'm going to take the fight to them. And let's see if they run out the room.
Well, how many times since Trump has been president has he been effectively challenged?
Because he knows how to dodge.
Nobody has effectively challenged.
He weaves and dodges.
So how?
They scared too.
Well, that's the Congressional Black Caucus and these people that you're mentioning who should do what they should do, they're not doing it. I think a real important question is to unpack why they're not doing it. What's up with folks? Why are people traumatized or disoriented or fearful? What is going on? Particularly when they're in policy-making positions.
Well, remember that they met with him and they left that policy manual. He asked for the policy manual. They gave it to him. He never responded. I mean, come on. You know, they realized that they were wasting their time.
And they did not.
That's what I'm talking about. You can't leave the manual. You leave the manual and say, oh, no, we'll come back for a meeting. We'll come back. Cameras, I want y'all to stay. That's all I'm saying. So again, here's my deal. If Donald Trump wants to respond back with the facts, I'm like, let's go. But while you got your sheet, I'm going to have my sheet. And I'm going to sit here and tell you, and it's going to be on camera, and then you can't keep sitting here lying. And I'm telling you, that's why Candace Owens don't want to debate. Charlie Kirk don't want to debate. That's why I straight up whooped that ass of Larry Elder in 2016 in Los Angeles, because he want to lie too. That's why I'm telling you, because the deal is what they used to these soft brothers and soft sisters who not going to come at them and going to come at them hard with the facts.
Well, maybe you should be strategic. Maybe you should pretend to be soft and do a week do a week of soft performance so they can be open to you, and then do a Trojan horse thing and drop the black bomb when you get up in there.
I can't.
You can't do soft.
That's not working.
That's just.
You can't do soft.
I can't do soft.
Well, I'm trying to give you strategies in which to actually engage these folks like you want to. You come and say, "I'm gonna get you." I'm gonna give. You know, they gonna laugh. They're not gonna let you in.
Cleo, I'm just letting you know right now that ain't gonna happen. I'm just letting you know right now that is not gonna happen. Okay, so I'm just gonna let you know. All right, y'all. I'm gonna go to a break right now. We come back. We're gonna talk about this potential blue wave that's on its way. This tsunami. Will it wash out Republicans? Will it wash in Democrats with a conscience? We'll break it down next.
What you want? Baby, I got it.
What you need? You know I got it.
All I'm asking is for a little respect. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I ain't gonna do you wrong. While you're gone.
I ain't gonna do you wrong, 'cause I don't wanna. All I'm asking
is for a little respect. Just a little bit.
P-E-C-T.
Find out
What it means to me.
R-E-S-P.
P-E-C-T.
Yeah.
A little respect.
Just a little bit. And I keep on trying.
I-9. It's easy to register. Text "We All Vote" to 97779.
A little respect.
All right, y'all. Well, Beauregard Sessions, he's at it again. Jeff Beauregard Sessions is going to file an appeal in federal court opposing the proposed court order that would force sweeping changes in the Chicago Police Department. Now, of course, Sessions is announcing this after Donald Trump went in front of a bunch of cops in Chicago and said, "Oh, we should make stop and frisk just national policy." Well, the city and Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan have submitted a proposed consent decree that will create tighter restrictions on the use of force, closer supervision of officers, and a more effective disciplinary system. But Sessions is like, nah, we don't really need these consent decrees. Joining us right now, of course, is Black Lives Matter Chicago chapter organizer, Aislinn Pulley. Aislinn, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, so I just love this. I love Republicans who talk about local control. And here you have the city of Chicago agreeing with a consent decree, the attorney general agreeing with a consent decree, but now Republicans saying, no, we don't want to have that. What do you make of this?
Well, I honestly, I think it's a response to the Van Dyke verdict. For the first time in the history of Chicago and possibly the history of this country, a white police officer has been found guilty of murdering a black person. That is historic. That is 100% the result of grassroots organizing, of people being in the streets, of mothers and fathers refusing to be silent about the murders of their children. And that is what has gotten us to this moment. That is why the DOJ came to Chicago. And that is why we now have a consent decree draft, which has been initiated by the thousands of people who have taken to the streets. So we are at a precipice of actual beginning of actual change in this city. And the response to that is that it's a threat to the status quo. And in order to respond to what could actually be changed to save our lives, Trump, along with Sessions, is preparing to clamp down on the movement here. And he's going to use any excuse to do that. And right now he's using the consent decree.
And again, we saw this in Baltimore where Jeff Sessions also early on opposed the Baltimore consent decree when the city and the police department said, hey, we're good with it. We want it.
Yeah, and right now the consent decree draft that the city and the Attorney General's office does not contain the sweeping proposals that is in our draft. So BLM Chicago, along with survivors of police violence, family members, and other community groups have drafted the People's Consent Decree, which includes tons of provisions which would protect families, which would remove CPD out of schools, which would create a behavioral health unit and create a diversion program so that people aren't thrust into the carceral system on quality of life offenses, which basically are crimes dealing with poverty. And only about 1% of what we put in our draft of the consent decree is in the city's version. So what they're actually protesting is a modicum of reform. The consent decree right now, as it stands, as the city's version, is not in any way radical, but it shows how far to the right Trump and Sessions are, that even the most modicum of reforms is seen as an absolute threat to them.
Yes, they want to protect cops, and they refuse. They absolutely refuse to call it out. And I can tell you that sitting at that table, I challenged Trump on that in terms of calling these cops out.
Yeah, 100%. And what they're really preparing to do is to fight back to reestablish full police impunity. Right now in the city of Chicago, we are challenging that. We are trying to overturn the fact that CPD has run rampant. Since the 50s, CPD has been torturing and occupying our communities. John Burge just died a week and a half ago. He was the former police commander that tortured over 120 Black men from 1970 to 1990 and was never held accountable for that. He just died a week and a half ago. Last Friday, we have the first conviction of a white police officer ever in the history of this city. What they are trying to do is overturn this work that we have been doing on the street and that has come through the blood, sweat, and tears of the thousands of people that we have lost to police violence.
Well, first of all, I certainly hope y'all will continue to put the pressure on them because that is critically important. Aislinn Pulley, we surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right then, folks. Again, just quickly go to my panel here, and I want to start with you, Barbara. Again, this is an attorney general who does not care about the people. He is all about how do you protect rogue, thuggish cops.
Absolutely. And that is what you do when you are imposing fascism. I mean, you got to be able to have your police, your law enforcement, that state machinery to be oppressive. And so these consent decrees, remember, it's not just Chicago, it's not just Baltimore. There's at least 20 that they are basically withdrawing from. And we can expect that actually what we're going to see is more leeway being given to police to engage in brutality, to engage in racial profiling, to engage in all of these methods that what they call promote Black social control. You know, we need to just be aware that as long as these people are in office, as long as they have the majority, that's what they're going to be up to.
Roland, you
all right then. Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Roland, you said that they don't care about people, but they do care about people, not us.
White people.
They care about their people.
Some.
And they want to keep their people in power. They want to keep their people protected and defended and in place. And they want to keep Black people a disposable population, a population that can be incarcerated, murdered, tortured, et cetera. They want to keep that dynamic going to protect their people.
Right.
I think we need to learn how to care about our people. They care about
Well,
theirs.
again,
We should let them care about ours and defend ours.
Well, that's one of the reasons why, because we do all we can to make it clear to people why they must vote, why they must be engaged, and why they must be active. And speaking of that, I want to bring in our next guest, because I earlier talked about this idea of what is happening politically in Florida, in Georgia, what potentially could happen when it comes to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and that is what would happen if African Americans again, turn out in massive numbers, but also Latinos. You're seeing white women running away from the Republican Party. You're seeing on the generic ballot, 14 points now, people will vote for a Democrat over a Republican. Joining us right now is Elliot Williams. He's a principal at the Raven Group, a public policy and communications firm there in Washington, D.C. Elliot, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered. We are looking at a situation where, again, understanding power, if Democrats take control of the United States House, and when you look at the numbers right now, Republicans are running scared. Before we get to the committees, I want to talk about this here. I know for a fact, because I've been talking to them, African Americans are going to make a play to become Speaker of the House. We can say right now that 3 different names that are out there. Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, Karen Bass, California. You heard Barbara Lee's name of California as well. Nancy Pelosi is going to have to deal with the fact, Elliot, that after this election, if things go the way they go now, the Congressional Black Caucus they already have the largest caucus on the Democratic side, but they may very well have anywhere from 52 to 56 black members of Congress. Right. That's a potent group of people.
Right, and you also left out Hakeem Jeffries from New York. A number of people have talked about him potentially as, if not running for Speaker, one of the senior positions in House leadership there. Look, African Americans do represent a very strong portion of the Democratic caucus, and certainly could challenge the Speaker or any of the other leadership roles. I mean, and I think we're going to talk about, my firm put out a report on diversity in the next Congress and the effect that number one, that people of color and LGBT individuals and women represent a significant portion of the Democratic caucus and will, play a huge role in the next Congress if the Democrats are in fact to take power.
And when we talk about that, you're going to have, of course, CDC members who will be chairing critical committees, education and workforce, financial services, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Bobby Scott on education and workforce, Homeland Security, Benny Thompson of Mississippi, oversight and government reform, Elijah Cummings of Maryland. Of course, he can't wait to subpoena Trump and his people. And also science, space, and technology, Eddie Bernice Johnson. Again, that's where power is held, and they will have the ability to call the Trump administration, different departments before Congress, demanding answers to many of the issues that the Republicans refuse to address.
Yeah, now that's a function of oversight. But when you think about putting diverse people, African Americans, in position of leadership, it's not just that they're going to go after President Trump. They are bringing a perspective to the leadership of Congress that simply isn't there right now. And if you look at something like the Health, Education, and Workforce Committee, it's not just about schools. It's about underserved communities. It's about African American communities and the kinds of attention to issues that would be brought, potentially by African American or Latino members of Congress. A great example is the Appropriations Committee would be potentially, the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee might be held by Lucille Roybal Allard, who's a Latino woman, and would put a different focus on potentially overseeing reports coming out of regarding to the wall and to family separation and so on. So all of these people, and I know we're talking a lot about African Americans, but it's across the ethnic spectrum here. All of them are going to potentially bring a new focus to Congress and to the leadership of Congress, and thinking about broadband and access to infrastructure, all these things that we think about in the context of Democrats. But when you put a racial or ethnic lens on it and the kinds of things that these leaderships will bring, it's going to be a very, very different Congress than not your father's Congress, for lack of a better way to put it.
Last question for you, Elliot. Yeah. Again, we talk about how would you articulate this? Let's just say in 30 seconds. You're out here, you running up against somebody, and they're like, okay, you know what? I'm not really interested in voting. It's not going to make any difference. What do you say to them in 30 seconds? Why they need to understand what will happen with their vote based upon what will happen basically in 28 days.
Well, look at what happened. Forget 28 days. Look at what happened 1 week ago in the United States Senate with respect to the Supreme Court. That is entirely a function of voting, number one, in the presidential election in 2016, and number two, in the Senate races across the United States in the years leading up to that. You ended up with a Supreme Court that is going to affect the rights of African Americans and women and people of color and LGBT for generations because elections have consequences. And people now are seeing that in the context of the Supreme Court. And you put that across every other potential issue that touches people. You know, I talked about immigration and infrastructure and all of these things that aren't just about these big things that governments do, but affect people's lives every day. And so absolutely, and you were talking about oversight of the president, same thing. The current Congress has not subpoenaed the president or called his people in to testify and so on. And so every possible issue that affects people, viewers of this show or just across America generally, it will be vastly different. And so the idea that your vote doesn't matter, it's, people need to get that out of their heads now, because and again, there's nothing clearer than it just happened on a national scale a week ago. Nothing clearer than the Supreme Court.
Elliot Williams, first of all, that wasn't 30 seconds, but I'll go ahead and let you off the hook on that.
I got a lot to say, I got feelings, I got thoughts.
Yeah, I got you. Right, you in your feelings. All right. Elliot Williams, Raven Group, I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
All right, folks, time for our HBCU Giving Day School. Shout out to Savannah State University, folks, founded in 1890, the oldest public historically black university in the state of Georgia. Of course, notable graduates include Shannon Sharp of Fox Sports. All right, folks, that is it. Roland Martin Unfiltered. Big shout out to Cleo Super Black Monago, Barbara Arnwine, as well as Joseph Williams. Thank you for joining us on our panel. And all the rest of our guests, thank you so very much. Folks, you support Roland Martin Unfiltered by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, joining our, of course, fan club. We certainly appreciate you supporting us in what we do, making this available. Tomorrow, I'm going to be back in the nation's capital. Of course, I've been here doing various interviews for the BeWoke.vote campaign. Can't wait till you see those interviews. We're going to have a grand time with them. So again, please support us in what we're doing because, again, we are providing something that nobody else is providing. That is giving you a wide perspective, bringing you top analysts and top guests as well, speaking to our issues, because that's what this is all about. So go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com and join our Bring the Funk fan club. Whatever you can give, it all actually matters. Folks, y'all have a great, great time.